So the browser, it has a thread of execution for JavaScript, right? So that's JavaScript. And it also has the output rendering of the page that's displayed. So this part here, I'll just put a happy face in that, but that's what the user is going to see within the browser. So they're seeing this as a window in their browser, but behind the scenes, there's more to this application that the user does not see. And so that's JavaScript plus CSS plus HTML. And when you direct a browser to a web server, the very first thing it does is it sends an HTTP request. And I know this, many of you already know this, so I hope I'm not wasting too much time doing this, but basically the web server could be implemented with any web server technology. It could be Apache running Ruby on Rails, or whatever, PHP, whatever. So I'll just put a big question mark in here. And it takes that input. Now that HTTP request is going to have a URL, which is the Universal Resource Locator, or URI, Universal Resource Identifier. And that is in addition to an HTTP verb, which is important to understand. So there are different verbs. These are also known as methods. I don't like the word method because that's confusing. We already have a different meaning for the word method in object-oriented programming languages. So the alternate word is verb, which I prefer. And so the verb could be a get or a post or a put or a delete. Are you all familiar with those verbs? There are others, by the way, but are you familiar with those main four ones? So there's get, post, put, and delete. And so which one would be used for read-only access, where you're not having any side effect or any, you're not modifying or creating or deleting or changing any data on the server? Which of those four verbs would you use to just simply read content and have no effect? Get. Get, that's right. And which one would you normally use to submit a form that contains a collection of name-value pairs that is sent to the server to tell the server to create a new record, or a new, create new data on the server that can then later be accessed in the future?
Put or post?
That'd be a post, right? So you submit a form, and usually you use a post with a form. You actually can set a form up to, use any verb you want. But so if a form is creating new data, it would typically be a post. And if you are using a form to update existing data, it would typically be a put verb. And of course, if you want to delete a record, then you send a request that just contains the information needed to locate a particular record of data, and then the delete verb would be used to actually tell the server to delete that data. So those are the verbs that come in, and it also could have other things. So there's headers. So there's HTTP headers, which running out of room here, that's supposed to say headers. So you can have, there's a bunch of standard HTTP headers that are defined as part of the HTTP protocol. Things like authentication information can be put in headers. There's also cookies. Cookies are becoming less popular now because HTML5 has more or less replaced the whole concept of cookies with a more powerful concept, which is local storage. But cookies are basically data that are maintained over the longer term within the client, so that when future requests are sent back to that same server, then that cookie information is submitted with the request, so that the server has contextual information and can remember details about that particular client. So you can use cookies to manage sessions. So when you go to a retail website and you put things in your shopping cart, then all of the things that are in your shopping cart is data that is temporarily created on the server in memory. Eventually it'll probably be written to a database, but in responding to a particular HTTP request, it's in memory. And then in future requests within that same shopping session, so you're buying runners, and then you're buying a toaster, and then you're buying a toothbrush. So as you're going and putting things in your shopping cart, the cookie that's being sent back and forth each time usually that will contain some kind of a unique identifier for that particular session. So it's identifying either an authenticated login user, or it could just be the IP address of that particular client. Just maintaining some session data. So session data is not really super long term. It's usually like 20 minutes or something like that, and typically set up with a cookie that times out within fairly short time interval. But anyways, those are verbs. So this request has a URL, it has verb, it has headers, it has cookies, and it might have query strings, right? So sometimes URLs will have a trailing question mark, and then following that is a list of name value pairs that are separated with ampersands. So that's the query string. It's just QS for query string here. And so anyways, that's basically the kind of information that comes in. All of that is used in some way to process a result, which is then sent back as an HTTP response. And I would, if you're not familiar with the whole HTTP protocol, you can get a nice quick overview of it. You can Google search and find people that have written blogs and stuff about it. But probably the most concise, accurate, and unbiased quick read on this topic would just be to go to Wikipedia. Okay? So Wikipedia is great for that kind of thing. Take a look at the HTTP protocol article on Wikipedia, and it talks about Tim Berners-Lee, the person that invented the protocol back in 1992 or 1993 approximately, when the web came into existence. So of course the internet existed for years before that, but the World Wide Web came into existence with this HTTP protocol. There's the HTTP, and there's also an encrypted version of that called HTTPS, which is secure, using secure sockets layer, or TLS, which is the transport layer security. But in any case, this initial request, and I'll put the word "init" here just to indicate that this, in traditional, like in the past, it was always a back and forth, request, response, request, response, request, response. And each time you get a response, you have a brand new page, and the browser completely replaces the contents of the entire page with whatever the current new page is. That's not how we typically work today. So nowadays, what we do is the initial request basically sets us up. It gives us, and actually, I show this as a single HTTP request. Usually, it's not a single HTTP request. Usually, a page that you're requesting has ancillary files that have to come along with it. So every image and every JavaScript file and every CSS file, all of those have to be sent back again as a sequence of HTTP request response messages. Now, there are ways of optimizing that. You can actually set things up so they're all bundled into one request for performance purposes, but that's just a performance enhancement. Virtually or logically speaking, we think of it as a sequence of requests and response to get this job done. So some of these things might be on a file system, right? So it might be that you have your CSS files here, your HTML files, your images, your JavaScript, whatever. So the code on the server might be interacting with the file system. So static files, for example, are what I'm showing here, but it could be that it might have a database or a web service. And I'm drawing it as a smaller box here, but this could actually be interacting through some web service, like a RESTful web service. Right? So you can actually have a multi-tiered type of a thing. So this is the first tier, and that's the second tier. You can have 3 tiers. In some cases, you'll have a front-end presentation tier. You'll have a middle tier, which deals with business logic. You'll have a back-end tier that deals with long-term database storage, relational databases, or no SQL databases, or big data, or whatever. So anyways, coming back to what I was going to get at here is this is the initial request. After that, then each interaction is not a request for a page, it's a request for some JSON. So instead of asking for an HTML file and ancillary related files, we're actually calling on the server to give us back some data. Today it's usually encoded as JavaScript object notation. In the past, it was encoded as XML, and that was the old days of the SOAP-based web services. But that's not so popular now. We typically prefer a RESTful approach, which more often than not involves JSON encoded data. But the point is that this request is very different from this request, because this request is actually not done by the browser. It's done by code in JavaScript that makes that request. And so the JavaScript here makes, at a low level, it uses something called the XML HTTP request object. It's hard to read my writing. I'm writing with a mouse, which is not easy. Sometimes that's abbreviated as just XHR. So that's the XML HTTP request object, which has been around for a very long time. It's pretty consistent across all browsers, and it was first created in Internet Explorer in the late 1990s by Microsoft. That was basically the original basis of what we call AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. And so AJAX, as they say, it stands for asynchronous JavaScript and XML. That was back in 2005 when that term was coined. The name of the person, by the way, is Jesse James Garrett. Kind of an interesting name. Jesse James, of course, being a famous outlaw cowboy type of character. But actually, his last name is Garrett. And he didn't invent AJAX. Actually, people were already doing AJAX a fair amount by that time. But he's the one that wrote a blog article that first used the term AJAX. And that name caught on like fire. All of a sudden, everyone had a name for it, and it got traction, and it became popular, and everyone wanted to implement AJAX-style websites. And so that's 12 years ago. Over that 12-year period, we've had various libraries. For example, jQuery is a very popular one. So jQuery makes it fairly easy to do DOM manipulation and AJAX calls for RESTful services. So I'm showing this JavaScript over here using this XHR object to get at the server to get the JSON. There's also some JavaScript code in here that uses the getElementById and other similar type functions to access the DOM, manipulate it, to edit it, add elements, delete elements, move elements, change attributes of elements, write HTML content within element content, right? All those things can be manipulated by JavaScript. So that's the basis of a single page application. 12 years ago when AJAX became a popular term, eventually that led to a deeper understanding of best practices. And if you take AJAX to its logical conclusion, like take it to its extreme, that then ends up being an SPA, a single page application. And today, the most popular framework for doing that is Angular. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful to understand all the concepts, all the technologies, all the background, all the architecture, and the concepts of SPAs and so on. That's why we have Angular. That's where it's all coming from. So before I erase this big messy drawing, are there any questions about any aspect of it?